Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you for making the time and attending this panel. I'm clearly in some great company. I've worked with Tom before, and it's a pleasure to meet the rest of the panelists as well. I think we're going to start by doing a quick run of introductions. Tom, do you want to go first?
Thanks. My name is Tom Frederikse. I'm a partner at Clinton's in London, a very large music firm. We've been specialized in music since 1952.
Hi, my name is Helienne Lindvall. I'm the president of the European Composer and Songwriter Alliance, which is the umbrella organization for all songwriter and composer organizations in Europe. So we have about 30,000 members. I'm Swedish, but I'm based in the UK, and I'm a songwriter. So.
Hello, everyone. I'm Alexandre. I'm product marketing manager at IRCAM Amplify. IRCAM Amplify is a commercial offshoot of the research lab IRCAM based in Paris. We have a wide range of products, audio algorithms, editing and processing audio AI through an audio as a service platform for music industry, audiovisual, video editing, audio and video production software.
Hello everyone, I'm Thijs. I'm co-founder of Music Netherlands, a network to foster innovation in the Dutch music sector. And I've also worked as a business development manager for the Benelux region for the Warner Music Group for the past 7 years. Mainly working closely with a lot of startups, technology hubs, emerging tech, including AI.
And I'm Priyanka. I run an entertainment law firm based out of India. A large part of my practice back home in India involves working with talent across film, TV, and music. And then the other half of the practice involves working with some very interesting stakeholders in the music business, publishers, PROs, a bunch of music tech companies that are all looking at navigating India and the surrounding region. So with that said, I've spent the last 2 days also being a mentor to some of the startups that were selected as part of the accelerator, and there's been a lot of conversation around AI. I know some of the panels earlier today, and one of the keynotes has already dived into quite a bit of the discussion. So I think without further ado, I'm going to just cut to the chase. Tom, I want to begin with you, right? Because I feel you're one of the most seasoned attorneys I've worked with in the music business. Do you feel that the current infrastructure that we have in place, or just really the state of affairs that we have right now as far as detection of AI-generated music is concerned, where do you feel that stands, and is that at all sufficient?
Oh, well, I'll start with just 60 seconds. If you missed Romain's presentation this morning, Romain from Deezer gave us an outstanding presentation about the state of detection. Deezer has thrown a ton of money at a team trying to figure out how to detect the amount of, or the individual items of generative AI tracks that are posted to Deezer, and they're doing some very good work, and they have had some successes in certain areas. There's a lot of it coming in. They know where it's coming from. We know the Suno and there's other places that are the sources. Problem is that every time they build a better mousetrap, someone else builds a better mouse. And it becomes an arms race. And I think the takeaway from this morning, and I hope, sorry to paraphrase Romain, but I think the takeaway is that this is a very long-term project, and there isn't going to be any kind of foolproof way to identify the AI-generated tracks on the DSPs in the coming years. I mean, he didn't say a number, but I had the impression that they've been doing this for a couple of years and they're still only in the intro stages. So we have to find a different solution for this decade and perhaps the next. So detection is a big challenge, and it may mean that this conversation needs to quickly move on to how do we deal with the situation we're in that's not going to be detected.
Right. And then, Alex, I want to ask you, right, picking up from where Tom left off, that your experience building the tool that you've been a part of for the last several months, I want to try and understand what, in your view, is, what are the challenges that you think we currently face with detection techniques that everyone's exploring and toying with?
Well, we are not in the, our tool is not dedicated to real-time identification, so we're not investigating this space, but Our tool is designed to allow music industry stakeholders to run a complete audit or to scan tracks, incoming tracks that are making it in their supply chain to complement the quality assurance. And if we could imagine some scenarios, depending on the ongoing talks within big players or for forthcoming potential regulations. We could imagine AI-generated tracks could be labeled as such, and we are calling for that, as Instagram does for visuals or TikTok does for videos. They could not, for the DSP, they could not surface in search results. They could be placed in a specific royalty pool, or they could be restricted to a lower tier, even to being taken down on these platforms. So you need to be prepared and to know with what volumes you are dealing with as a platform.
But are there any primary indicators to identify AI-generated music that's being ingested?
Yes, absolutely. First, you have quality issues. If you're looking at the generative AI for visuals, as powerful Midjourney or Wall-E, or the results they are producing will include some defaults, some visible defaults. So it's easy to make an assumption that AI-generated music will include defaults as well. But it's difficult to prove it. At IRCAM Amplify, we leverage our audio channel expertise to tracking glitches and artifacts in an audio file. And this path proved right by comparing humanly created music dataset on one side and AI-generated music tracks dataset on the other side. We've been able to identify some recurring feature of poor quality in the tracks. Second, and more from our main perspective, in the same way a musical instrument can be has its own timbre, we could think that AI-generated music could be also identified from its timbre. So this hypothesis was put forward by analyzing samples of musical tracks generated by various models with an IRCAM dedicated algorithm. So we combine these two approaches. And the quality issues are the main obvious and the most commonly shared, I think. And the timbre identification, it's more specific to us, I hope.
Okay, no, thank you. That's very, very interesting and helpful. Tej, if I can bring you in there for a quick second. I think there's two things that I want to try and understand from you, right? Number one is, how effective do you think some of these methods are? And a follow-up to that is there other avenues or other kind of training that we can look at to even make some of these detection techniques more powerful and more accurate?
So I think in general these detection methods are quite accurate in the fact that AI-generated music, it follows certain patterns, because that's basically what AI generation does. It's tried to fit a lot of noisy data into a specific pattern. So what AI detection methods are looking for is, okay, do we see resonating patterns within the way the music is being produced, which is something a human will probably not do, because they often make tracks which don't follow a specific pattern, because that would be a lot of boring music. I think the suggestion raised by Alexandre was also a good one. It's what Matt has now introduced on Instagram. I think AI watermarking would be a good solution as well to request that from these models. But also coming from my background and from a label perspective, I think a lot of the concern is the transparency in where these generative AI models are being trained on. And I think, for instance, Legislation can be a really good force in that one. And a EU AI Act, which has been initiated, is a really good step towards that. And probably is also a big part of the answer, is to have more transparency on what these generative AI tools are trained upon.
In your experience, and this is not specifically just for you, but I'm curious, have we come across instances of false positives on any of these techniques? Because I know you mentioned that it can be pretty accurate. Sorry.
Well, yeah. With every AI model, there's a trade-off. There will always be false positives, and I think when you look at the judgment whether something is AI generated or not, there always needs to be a human judgment when something is raised, because there will always be instances where an AI generator or an AI detection tool will misclassify something wrongly, because there's never 100% accuracy possible within these models. Definitely not in the real. In the noisy real world, so that's needed. A good example is also the VHR use during the European Championship. If you look at there's always a 99% accuracy there. So, for instance, the discussions that you have about a player being offside or not or onside, and you get technology to these really close margins, it's not possible to exactly track the moment when the ball has left the foot of the player that it passed to the other player. And technology will always have a margin of error. So when you have this discussion where something is just off the line or just onside or just offside, that's, I think, where the limitations of technology also are and where human intervention is needed.
But you could apply a confidence score and to set a certain threshold under which manual checking will be performed. Could be a good use for offside football, I think.
Helienne, coming to you, and you're an artist yourself. You worked with songwriters quite closely. From if I have my ear to the ground, what sort of feedback are you getting from that community as far as AI detection techniques and trends are concerned? I sometimes feel that one arm doesn't talk to the other. Like there's the rights holders and artists on the one hand, obviously feeling increasingly concerned about AI and generative AI and how it could affect their impact in terms of revenue and credibility and brand as talent. But then on the other hand, I also feel that there are all of these incredible, innovative music tech platforms and engineers and specialists working on both sides, right, to train as well as to find interesting detection techniques. Do you feel more of a conversation needs to take place between these two communities? Is there already an active conversation, you feel?
I think there could always be more conversation, but I think a lot of the time, musicians are mischaracterized as being anti-tech or whatever. I would say that musicians are probably in the forefront when it comes to technology and technological innovation. Most of my songwriter friends are very much kind of interested in what can be done. I think the worry is, of course, the value of music. We have, in particular, with our what's happened a lot is because earning a living from streaming, if you write pop music, has become very difficult as a songwriter. Because you have to have hundreds of millions of streams to even kind of make it worth it. So a lot of songwriters went into production music, library music, to make a living because that was a kind of a good paycheck. But of course, their neck is the first on the chopping board when it comes to AI, because it's when music is not in the focus, then AI it's easier to exchange music by real people to AI. And I wanted to address, we're actually very active. One of our members is a composer, but he's also a professor in AI in France. And he talked about what you were talking about, Tom, about the detection. He'll put like half of his class coming up with some sort of kind of watermarking or detection of AI, and then he'll put the other class, give them the task of coming up with something to circumvent it. And usually they're able to do so in like 24 hours. So what we're looking at is how can we kind of just make sure that the infrastructure for composers and musicians continue, so that we can still have a thriving music community. So we very much focus on the AI Act, and the transparency, as you're talking about, has been very much at the forefront. We're glad that that was put into the AI Act, but now we have to really put the pressure on when it comes to how transparent it is. Because the way that they're looking at it, I had a conversation with somebody from the commission who's on the AI committee that said, oh, well, if they let us know that they scraped it from YouTube, then that would be enough. I'm like, well, that doesn't really say anything. There's as we all know, everything is on YouTube, whether it's licensed or not. So, and the advantage is, when it comes to this, we're working with all creative groups. It doesn't just affect musicians, it affects photographers, visual artists, journalists, authors. So we're all kind of banding together to come up with solutions.
Right. I'm personally also very intrigued with transparency, and Tom, as attorneys, right? I think we're constantly evaluating how complex music and music rights are, and I think it's easier said than done, right? That we need to have more effective tools and technology to detect use of copyrightable material in generative AI. But just given how complex music is, what are your thoughts on transparency and how all of the different layers of music and music rights and contributions from so many different stakeholders that go into making a composition, what sort of bearing do you think that has when it comes to transparency or developing effective tools for detection?
Transparency is the most slippery word ever, isn't it? It's very, very difficult to come up with it.
I think we also use it very loosely.
We're in danger here at a music tech conference because we all want to encourage technology, and there are a lot of people here who are making fantastic tools, and we want to support them as much as possible. And in the fullness of time, I'm sure there will be detection that works, because everything is possible in the fullness of time. But right now, we just heard some progress that uses words like probability, statistical, quality assessment. They're all not good enough to create any kind of rule or any kind of law, God forbid. What do we have now? 30,000 a day that are being posted to the sites, AI-generated songs. Maybe there'll be 100,000 a day soon, maybe more. If a tenth of those were to be challenged every single day, then it would stop the system. So I don't think it is an option to create a rule that is based on probability that has to have, like VAR, another human adjudicate. There's just too much of it. And furthermore, well, I mean, if we're talking about poor quality being an indication of AI generative, then all my music would be taken down immediately, I'm sure. So I really can't see that any of I can't see that that's really a road forward. So transparency would be the right way to do this, and it would be wonderful if we could get all the generative AI companies to somehow agree that they're going to watermark every single thing created on their platforms, and that's the rule. But that's not the rule. It is actually impossible at the moment, and probably forever, to get every single company on Earth in every country to agree to some sort of watermarking or stamping ID system. So if we haven't got the companies telling us we're unable to detect them when they come up, we're unable to deal with an uncertain rule with adjudication, I don't really see how we can do anything other than learn how to live with all this AI-generated music. Yeah, it is depressing, but there must be answers to it. The music business spent 5 or 6 years saying we've got to stop streaming. This stuff is going to kill us. And at last they decided we're going to figure out a way to live with this. Maybe that's where we are right now.
But also, can I just kind of comment on that? I think, we shouldn't let perfection be the enemy of action at all. And I think in the same way as, we didn't eradicate piracy. We came up with other solutions that are better solutions for consumers. And I think in general, a lot of consumers, if you have ethical platforms, if you have, just kind of start making that action of being supportive of music creators, you know, there's always going to be people who are on piracy sites. There are always going to be people that are going to try to circumvent any kind of detection of AI. But there will also be companies that kind of can make it part of their promotion to do something that actually is artist friendly. And I know that sounds, I choose to think of the glass half full, Tommy. And I think that for us, this is kind of like, we have to move towards some sort of solution for that to kind of sustain, our members, right to work. And I think this is actually with AI an existential philosophical question, because it's just because you can do something. I heard like on the Daily Show, they said about art and AI. The guy said, well, I understand why you would have AI in medicine, but AI in art with music, what, you finished Spotify?
I have another philosophical question for you. Do you think that, cultural differences or genre differences might affect the legitimacy of some of these detection techniques or tools that are developing? And this is to everyone. I know that's a curveball.
We care to integrate in our training data sets the widest array of genre possible.
So let me pause you there for a second, because that was also something that I was curious about, is what is really the data that's being used when it comes to training for all of the tools and techniques on the detection side? I think we've talked a lot about the data or the training sets for machine learning, but I'm curious what happens on the opposite side.
Well, as we strive for transparency, and we all agree on that, I will be completely transparent, and we are. We train our model on a proprietary data set we just acquired for that on humanly created tracks. And to train our model on a track generated by Music AI model, we used publicly available data sets coming from these platforms, which usually start with, which usually end with a O, and we use this publicly available data set. So we are completely transparent on this, and we are striving for ethical AI.
Thijs, do you have any thoughts on this, on training techniques and what sort of data? Because I know when it comes to, that's one part of it, and then going back again to, do you think it's broad enough that culture or genre-based differences are not likely to stand in the way of creating accurate tools for detection?
If culture stands in the way of creating those tools, if I understand it correctly?
Yeah, I think cultural or genre differences, for example, folk music, and then each country has actually their own proprietary versions of some of these compositions and sound recordings, right? So I'm always curious that how does a machine identify that? Does it just generally recognize it? Because these are all, they're very, very specific to genre or culture of that music from a certain territory.
Yeah, indeed. So I think this was one of the challenges that was raised in the session this morning. It's about the fact that you have to continuously update and train these models, because obviously genres music keeps on changing. I think something else I want to address, following up on discussion earlier, I think what we're kind of missing out on is that copyright infringement has always been a problem in the music industry, and generative AI is not really new. I think actually it's better detectable than normal copyright infringement in a lot of instances. As well, why would it be interesting to infringe copyright using generative AI? It's because the music model currently allows for it. The way streaming works, it makes it possible. It makes it interesting to do this because you can make money from it, and the barriers to entry, the DSPs are very low currently. So that makes it possible for everyone to do this. So I think that's something that we need to also address as a music industry as one of the reasons why this happens. The other thing is that I want to address is that we can also see this, like how is the user going to use these tools, and I think that's something Helienne tapped in on. Like, if you're a listener of artists, like why would you be interested in I'm not sure if you heard the track, actually, the Mariah Carey track this morning that he played. It was very bad. You could immediately hear, like, that's not the content you want to listen to
Yeah, no
in
need
your
of
free
a
time.
detection tool for that.
No, indeed. So why don't we, looking from a listener perspective, how is he or she going to use these tools? It might just be an expression of fandom. And then it's about, can we just make this an opportunity? And shouldn't this be treated, for instance, as user-generated content that will come out of this? And shouldn't we look into different kind of copyright monetization? I think, for instance, a startup like VoiceSwap AI, which is trying to monetize artists' voices and make that copyright protected, I think that's an interesting development.
Right. And then do you think it's possible to standardize the adoption of detection techniques across the music industry?
Well, the music industry is very complicated, as we all know. So it means a lot of the rights holder and a lot of the stakeholders to come together and unite. And I think that's the only way that we can address and tackle this problem. But again, like copyright infringement has always been a problem and still is a problem. Just generated AI is just a new addition to it, but I think even less difficult than normal copyright infringement.
I just also wanted to add something when it comes to, with the whole licensing thing. One of our concerns, because we're very much for, coming up with structures for licensing AI, when you're talking about, it's a lot easier when it comes to voices because in general, voices are very detectable. It's harder to detect if it's multiple songs that have been used in generating a new song. So I think that what we're kind of looking at is then we can tell that the major companies, the major labels, are looking to get in on, yes, they're suing Suno and Udio. Our concern is that they'll make a settlement, they'll get a big lump sum, and license it that way. And there'll be, again, we get back to the transparency, but it'll be unallocable income that will just go to the bottom line of, Lucy and Grange's and other people's bonuses. And I think for us, we're trying to kind of come out ahead and urge legislators, because that is sort of at the same time, one of the tools that we have, because we believe that they understand that it's a whole infrastructure in so many countries, like millions, hundreds of millions of people that work in the music industry, that we need to come up with something that doesn't just reward, these major companies, but can actually work in the future with licensing. So that is our when we look at voice swaps and things like that, are great solutions. We need to come up with solutions like that for parts of the music that are a bit less identifiable. And of course, then we're also looking at kind of collective licensing and at some sort of course, in Europe, they're much more open to levies, which the UK not so open, and the US definitely not open to. But I think in Europe that it has worked before to at least have some sort of levy that can then be distributed on a kind of analog basis in the same way as we do with public performance and hairdressers and shops and things like that, just so that we don't kind of, because we're talking a lot about streaming, where people will earn money on AI generated music, but also what we got to think about is for companies that want to use music but don't want to pay for it. So are they going to use AI music because it doesn't cost anything, or should AI music also have the same value as regular music, but that we have to then figure out how that revenue should be distributed to those who actually, whose music the generative AI was based on.
I'm shocked at your suggestion that the major labels are not acting in the best interests of composers and artists. Can't countenance that. Helienne raises probably the most important point, that we're all on this panel talking as if AI-generated music is going to have some kind of value from having copyright, and yet the European government and the US government are currently trying to organize the opposite situation, where you cannot register. an AI-generated title in the US, or you can't protect it somehow in Europe. Now, if that were to happen, there is an argument from some pretty decent European politicians and American politicians saying that if it has no copyright value, then it cannot have any value to the companies that would want to exploit it as music, and that will remove the incentive to undermine production music and all the rest. There's another line of thinking that says anytime the law tries to proclaim that music has no value, it hurts us all. And that is an abominable law. We must never have anything on the books that says there is any music that has no value of any kind. And it does have value. I think we all recognize it has some kind of value. People want to use it for their, I don't know, dog and cat videos or something. It just doesn't come from a human. I like the idea that maybe user-generated content is a model. It's not UGC, though. We're missing the user, aren't we? So that doesn't fit neatly. But we do need to find the model. We probably do have to give copyright to these songs and these productions in order to stop a move towards music having no protection at all and undermining copyright at its very root. But that means the step one is to fight the American government and the European government and stop them from doing this thing right now, which is not going to be easy because it feels like a train at the moment that it's on its way. Even if we were to succeed in stopping those governments from blocking copyright protection, well, then we can't identify who has each one. If there is a cost for training, then as Helienne says, that's another huge worry, because we've seen how the big media companies will trade a settlement for liability in place of a license, and that will deprive creators. So right now it looks like the fight is between the huge media companies and the huge tech companies, and artists don't get a look in.
So you've been signed to a major as well?
Well, thank you, actually, Tom, and everyone else for summing that up so beautifully. I know we still have a few minutes left, so if anybody has any questions, I'd love to take them.
Hey, thank you so much for this. Really, really great points from everyone. I was curious, I mean, I think the parallel between the rise of streaming and the rise of AI-generated music is there's a lot of crossover and a lot to be learned. I was very curious to understand, like, I think especially from both of your legal perspectives, given what we've learned from like the foundational agreements between the labels and publishers and the DSPs, which definitely weren't perfect, what would you change, or what do you think we can learn now in terms of if we are going to try to do a licensing deal with the Suno or Udio, what can we learn from potentially those flaws or mistakes that we put in place when we started the streaming agreements that we can learn and apply here?
I was going to raise that really quickly. You don't mind if I jump in? You mentioned ethical.
Yeah.
And I mean, is it ethical that a major label signs an artist and the artist gets 20% of net profits? Is that ethical? I don't know. I mean, if you accused Universal of doing unethical deals, they would certainly not agree with that. So ethical maybe is a worrying word to use in this context. But in terms of the streaming deals and AI, I think there's quite a lot of overlap. I would like to see a similar structure all across, so long as we can find a way to allocate to artists, because the unallocation point is paramount.
And I would add to that I think, and I would say this as a songwriter, but really the split to have 15% for the composition and 55% for the label, it's wrong when it comes to streaming, and definitely when it comes to AI. You can argue that actually the song is at least as important as the recording when it comes to AI. So really, there should be a 50-50. Yeah, but no, but I think we can all kind of, well, songwriters agree that major labels or record labels are not going to agree with it, but I think if you actually look at it logically, and the only reason that or one of the reasons that we don't have that is the vertical integration of major labels owning major publishers, and the conflict of interest that exists in the music industry. So obviously that's a deeper problem that needs to be.
3 wars we have to fight.
Yeah, that needs to be. But we're willing to take those fights. You have to, and I think this is a good time to do it.
We have one question here, then there, and then there. Yes, and there also.
I'm going to ask the same question I asked to that panel out there, which is just the anarchist in me just wants to rip the whole fucking thing up and start again. If you could do that, what would you put in place? What laws would you put in place?
I'm not the expert on the legal space, but
what do you want to see?
I think we could imagine there are already some models available who allowed artists to build their own model to be then applied by the end user to his music. So I think this is a very good way to follow, but it will be only a niche in the niche, I think, compared to all the big consumers generative AI models we are all talking about. But it's definitely a good way to follow. So you can apply your style, your guitar style, your bass style, just like the voice, as Thijs mentioned. It's one of the good initiatives.
Yeah, so can you hear me? I don't either. I wanted to ask, because what I hear a lot being at an AI music company is that's my livelihood you're taking away. And what I think is like, okay, if we had universal basic income, your livelihood should be taken care of, and then we can all openly have this conversation of how do things work. Obviously, this is not happening. So I love your points of view of like, okay, if we have this in place, how can we actually focus on you can be creative and earn an extra living off this? So
6 wars we're fighting now.
I got to say, because you bring up an interesting point, because I remember listening to Sam Altman being interviewed by The New Yorker and saying, oh, you know, billions of people are going to lose their jobs because of AI, but that's okay because we can solve that easily by a universal basic income. And I was thinking, it's interesting how these kind of billionaires become socialists when it comes to, you know, the creators or the solutions, while not paying taxes in barely any countries around the world. So how is that going to be funded? How would that be funded in, you know, the world isn't the US, the world isn't the Europe, you know, it's like how would we support it worldwide? So as much as I'm a Scandinavian, I do not believe that that's going to happen. So.
Thank you. This has been really, really good. So the one part of the whole industry-wide conversation that I feel has been slightly neglected is songwriters, like true to form, right? So obviously everyone's talking about like matching tracks, like we notice you're using this person's voice, or we would notice using technology, whatever. But that's all on the recording side, right? So I've played around with Udio and Suno. Please don't call the police. But the one thing that shocked me is like, oh my God, I can now write a song, right? It just wrote me an amazing song, right? So what I'm thinking is, even if like one of our like positive outcomes is Universal and the majors do a deal to license Udio and Suno and all that stuff, and then pay royalties to the songwriters like who have written those songs in the past, but that only helps songwriters who have written songs in the past. Like, what about songwriters in the future, right? So say like Dua Lipa has a single and she uses 5 songwriters to create the song for her, right? When this is what, even if it's positively licensed, even if it's like correctly licensed, like why does she need 5 songwriters now to write a song? So I think like songwriters are being slightly left out of the conversation.
I was going to bring this up earlier because there are the 3 different types of AI. There's the writing the song, the melody, there's the production of creating the song, and the generator of the voice, or the thing you were just talking about with style of guitars. And the composition one is actually the most difficult one of all to detect. I had a fantastic conversation with Per here in the front row, and I suggest you all find him later on if you can, because he's a composer who's actually doing a controlled AI composition study at the moment. Fascinating discussion. There's so much to learn, but one of the key things I learned is that, and I think we all kind of knew this, but it was interesting to hear it said out loud, that with production stuff, you get an AI that comes back with bass drums and hi-hat and guitar, and you use it. But with composition, you get a melody back. And with a melody, you don't have to keep that within the machine. You can whistle it and then play it on the piano. And how's anyone going to know that came from AI?
That's what I mean. There's
Yeah.
no link, right?
There's
you
no
can't
link.
put an audio file in. If like, so say Dua Lipa goes on, I like, a random artist, right, goes onto Udio, it writes a song, then Dua Lipa just records it from scratch. There's no link for that to be matched.
Well,
Like
exactly.
you can't.
And then you have to have the, Roman touched on this morning, you also have to have the argument about whether 5 notes is the melody or 7 notes, or an extra hang of tempo in the middle changes it. You know, there's a big argument about whether one melody is the same as another, and there are only so many notes. And then who's that guy that did the AI, all melodies in the world registered in order to stop copyright infringement? Yeah, there's a wonderful project going on of somebody who's registered every melody under the sun, say like 50 million or something. And the idea is that if you try to sue, he'll say, well, I got it first because I own every melody in the world. So that there are so many problems with infringement of melody. Detecting is also an issue. I noticed that Romain skirted the question this morning, but I'll say it straight out. Google's Content ID works quite well on recorded music, but not very well on melodies, especially if somebody like me is the one singing it, because I can't sing. So it cannot figure out what song I'm trying to sing. And that is frequently the problem. People do interpretations, or they just can't sing, and you have no idea if the melody is an infringement or not, or what melody it is. So this is a huge issue that cuts right across AI. What do we do about compositions?
I thought that's what I've been talking about this whole time as a songwriter, but hey, you know. But that's why I was talking about, like, you know, how you might, like I said, you know, it's much harder, you know, to have a detection of the composition. But again, you know, so we have to come up with a structure that is not going to be perfect, but is going to in some way reward. You know, you were talking about, you know, how will it affect future writers? Again, when we think of, if I would make the parallel of public performance, it's like, you know, yes, you know, it's based on an imperfect analog, distribution model, but it has enabled, you know, musicians and create an infrastructure for songwriters and composers that, you know, that will keep the value of music. That if you play music in any public place, you know, you have to have a license for it, and even though the distribution is not correct, well, now there's technology that can detect it. But in a similar way, when it comes to AI, yes, the ingestion should be, because of the transparency, should be slightly easier. The output a lot more difficult. But as long as we kind of like look at solutions that can still reward humans, and not the humans that are at the top of corporations or the AI companies, but the members of you know, creators. Yeah, exactly.
I think that's why it's so important that we need human judgment and not rely on just detection systems, because that's exactly, you know, when you come into the melody discussion, I think that's the general discussion why you come into a discussion of general copyright law, actually. That's now, you know, whenever somebody sues someone because of copyright infringement, you need that human angle, that human judgment there, and you don't want detection or any, you know, if somebody's some music is allowed on a platform. No, you don't want it just to depend on technology again. You want human intervention there as well.
Then we'll train a model on human judgment to be able to automate.
We'll go into the full inception mode there. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. Time is over now, so it was very interesting. And it's
Thank
now time
you.
for a break, so see you later for the last panel.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.